So traveling together, you exit the building, and it takes you about 3 minutes on a light walking pace before you see, reaching up to the sky, this large tower, and lying at its base, this immense hall structure built from stone with these red roofs separating each section. You can see very clearly that this is a very well fortified structure. And you imagine that in a crisis such as the one that this town has faced, this probably would have been the one place where everyone gathered to stay safe from any such invasion. One thing that you are noticing is that the structure itself doesn't seem to have any kind of other exterior wall that surrounds it. And now that you're thinking about it, you didn't see a surrounding wall of the entire village either. And you're starting to think about just how susceptible a place like this must have been to something like an outburst of the undead, where such creatures would have been free to roam the forests at night under cover of the tree lines and pounce upon unsuspecting victims with no real structures in place to slow them down. As you approach, you realize immediately that there is no specific reason for you to enter the willow halls themselves. You instead opt to take the path around the outside. As you travel, I'm going to need a perception check from chat. Squid! Hit us with the roll. Ooh, bring us to a total of 10. It's not that bad, chat, okay? 10 is like middle of the road. Hey, I have eyeballs and I can see things. So you proceed around. You notice atop some of the walls, some of the ramparts that line the top of these buildings, there are several individuals. They don't seem to be guards. They just seem to be people going to and fro between these various sections, choosing to take the path at the top of the building itself to get between them, that seem to look down at you, observing you. You see a couple of frowns, and a couple of these individuals also wave down towards you, and you can just hear light conversation taking place, perhaps gossiping about the arrival of new individuals. What do you do, chat? Okay, so you choose to wave back, taking mind of the words relayed to you by Aaron, deciding to make a little bit of an effort. If you're going to be here a while, you might as well start introducing yourself as a friendly and approachable figure, even if that's not who you feel like at the best of times. You wave up towards these people on the ramparts. Many of them wave back, some of them smiling. As you get around to the rear of this building, turning the corner, you get your first glimpse towards the path that leads to the Forlorn Parish. This area that you are now aware of is essentially an encampment sealed off by a wide lake of undead creatures, the villagers that had transitioned to undeath a year prior, possibly wandering aimlessly, or something perhaps more sinister, you're not sure. The woods seem unsettlingly thick and dark, as it seems like the canopies themselves surrounding this area are so dense that barely any light seems to pass through them. I'm going to get another check. This is going to be an insight check to try and figure out what kind of behavior might be the cause of this. Because as you're looking around, the forests that you traveled through, they seemed to be, best you could tell, regularly thinned. So it immediately strikes you as a little unusual that the forest here is as thick as it is. Elock! Okay, so this brings us to a total of 16. So as you look towards this forest, there's a moment at which you ponder whether or not this is some kind of supernatural circumstance. Like there's some kind of dark, magical energy emanating from this space of undeath lying beyond your sight through the thick forest trees. But then you think a little bit better of it, and you're like, actually, it's probably more likely that the people responsible for cutting the wood, for gathering wood, simply do not want to venture anywhere near this place. Obviously because of the dangers of possible undeath lurking in the trees, anything that managed to make it over or through the water that surrounds the parish. but also it's very likely that if this place has not got a lot of new visitors over the years, that the people responsible probably have people they know on that island, and the idea of venturing closer to it is somewhat haunting and daunting to them. So the trees have just been left to grow wildly. So you continue on. It's not long before you see the walls of the buildings of the barracks, which kind of stick out of the ground almost like a square, but you can very clearly see that it's actually a series of buildings that are chained together, and that there is some kind of courtyard dead center in the middle. And as you get closer, you can hear the sound of clashing steel and grunts of exertion. One thing that surprises you immediately is that in the places that you've been in the past, a barracks of this kind of size, you'd imagine there to be more ruckus, more sound being emanated from it. But best you can tell from where you are approaching, there can't be more than maybe a small handful of people practicing within this space out of sight, further kind of lending towards the idea that the population is probably dramatically thinned in Willowdale. You approach the building, and before long, circling around it, you seem to find what is the main entrance, which is actually on the far side. This larger building that stretches out in either direction, much longer than it is deep. These reinforced steel doors, ever so slightly ajar, curved over in like an arch. You enter into a fairly simple space. You can see as you pass through the doorway, the stone walls of this building are incredibly thick. Looking at the side where the door does not cover of the doorway, you can see that there are at least 3 layers of cobblestone that line it. You pass through into the space, and you do not immediately see anybody behind what is a simple wooden desk at the far end of the room. To give you a sense of the shape of it, it seems as though as you enter, the room stretches out to your left and to your right about 15 feet in both directions, but from where you are at the doorway to the far wall is only about 15. So we're talking like at least 35 to 40 foot long, and then about 15 foot deep. To the left and to the right of this desk, there is a door that clearly leads into a corridor that goes further down the buildings on either side of this courtyard. So as you enter, there are no people present in this fairly bland space. Let's do a perception check. Elock again! 13! So, +7? Yeah, boy. So, dirty 20, as I call it. You take a look around the space. As you look towards the desk, you can clearly see that there's some kind of bowl on top of it. The surface itself seems remarkably bare. There are no papers. There's no form of light source there. There is simply this one single bowl sitting in the middle of this desk. And you can see that there's a little bit of steam rising up from it. There's very clearly been somebody in this room, but they probably only sat down to eat a little bit and then left something behind for reasons you're not quite aware at this time. This definitely seems like a space that is traveled, though it's probably very rarely busy, seeing as you look down, you can see again dust that seems to coat very lightly most of the floorboards, and you can make out a couple of footprints leading in either direction down these corridors to the left and to the right. At least enough to maybe indicate by the shoe sizes that there are 2 or 3 people who came in here today. What would you like to do, chat? You stand in this empty room, there's no one to greet you, and you haven't made a lot of noise, so it's very unlikely that anybody's aware that you're in here currently. The room itself, apart from this central desk, is more or less completely bare, apart from some weapon racks on the left wall and the right wall. However, there's only a small handful of weapons still there. There's maybe 2 spears, a great sword, and a couple of rusty bits of armor that are just kind of thrown into the corner. Okay, so you call out, trying to beckon or summon anybody who might currently be within the space. I'm going to need a performance check from you, chat. So, Kite, hit us with the roll, my friend. 2. -2. 2 - 2, chat. You call out, and your voice cracks a little bit as you do, but it comes off a lot more aggressive than you intend. There's a slight pause in the combat. These individuals clearly stop training. It only lasts for a couple of seconds, though, and then they just continue on. So what are you going to do, chat? Choosing to go left, and you're traveling for maybe only about 5 or 10 feet down this very simple corridor. The left side, the outer wall, lined with various memorabilia and pieces of armor on display, hooked up to the walls. The occasional strange, esoteric-looking weaponry, a curved dagger here, or a strange pronged spear somewhere else. Clearly ornamental pieces, perhaps some kind of legacy of people who once lived here or trained here. Very quickly, the corridor opens up on your right side, the wall being replaced simply by a series of supporting pillars that go on a good 50 to 60 feet before then closing off again into a corridor and then proceeding into whatever building lies beyond that. You're able to turn off to the right. Looking in that area, you can now see this big open courtyard. You'd guess at least a 50-foot square. No roof to it, completely open atop to the elements. The terrain, a mixture of kind of torn up and worn grass, sand, and rock. Directly in the middle, there are 3 individuals that you see. You very clearly are able to make out 2 younger individuals, clearly taking part in some kind of training exercise. One of them appears to be a fairly young half-elf man, and the other appears to be a young halfling girl. Standing a little bit of distance away from them, not really paying attention to the training taking place, there seems to be a middle-aged human man who seems to be staring off into the clouds. You can see his hair is grayed, tied back into a ponytail that kind of rests over his right shoulder. He's currently dressed in fairly formal attire, a very well-tailored white linen shirt and formal dark brown trousers, and what are very clearly very impractical formal brown leather shoes. This individual immediately stands out as somebody who you wouldn't expect to see standing in the middle of a training arena. You call out just a simple greeting, hello, this time restraining yourself and taking a little bit more time to prepare this simple greeting, nonetheless. As you approach the footfalls of your entire group, yourself striding fairly confidently at the front of the pack, with Trenk at your side, who seems to be constantly looking to you for some kind of guidance or direction, and then Alden, the owl bear cub, down by your left flank, Roga the turtle, kind of absent-mindedly wandering a couple of feet behind you, not really paying attention to what lies in front, just seemingly amazed, taking in the environment, each moment some kind of moment of intrigue or surprise. The 2 younger people who are currently in the middle of some kind of training exercise promptly stop as you approach. As they do and they take a look to you, this man dressed in formal attire snaps his fingers at these 2 kids and tells them to get back to work. He then looks to you. Ah, strangers. So, what brings you around these parts then? Not every day we get such a unusual group wandering into our fair village. Is there something you need? How do you respond? Okay, so you take a few minutes to explain the situation, not giving too many details, but only the necessary ones to barter whatever agreement you come to here. You introduce yourselves one by one. This individual does not reach out for any kind of formal handshake or greeting, simply stands there at the other side of these kids who are now between you and him as you're talking through them as they train. Eventually introduces himself as Lucas Amberon, the town mayor. Doesn't seem overly happy that somebody from the outside has approached him looking to do some work. This person very clearly one of the more suspicious types. Nonetheless, if you do want to get involved in other people's business, as he puts it, then you can start your investigations with some items of interest that he has locked up in the Willow Halls. We will say simply that you are asked to wait until the children have finished their training exercise. So what I'm going to do is I am going to ask for an insight check quickly from chat. As you sit and you wait, there are no seating areas around, so you all have to sort of plop yourself down on the rough grass. Still a little bit damp from the storm from the previous night. You just sit there and you observe, as you often do, to see what you can discern about the individuals in front of you. Infected Kitty. Hit me with the roll. Whoa! Jeez, man! Okay, so with a total of 24, 19 plus 5, you sit there paying most of your attention initially to the two children going through this training exercise. Best you can tell, this halfling and this half-elf, very occasionally, you notice them both kind of taking a moment of pause in respect to each other, and they are very quickly scolded by Lucas Amberon, this person who seems to be lording over them and issuing them orders. These children seem to be very obedient, maybe even slightly afraid of this man. Lucas Amberon seems to be pretty uninterested in exactly what these kids are doing. He seems to be there exclusively to make sure that they do it, and that they do it relentlessly. You're very quickly realizing that Lucas Amberon, the mayor of this town, is a very stern man and a man of discipline. So you wait for what seems like about an hour. It starts to feel very unreasonable, not just for you waiting, but also for the kids who are being forced to relentlessly train for this amount of time. Finally, the kids take a bow, first to Lucas Amberon and then to each other, and then they seem to move off in separate directions. Lucas Amberon then summons you over with a hand gesture and then leads you back out of the barracks and into the Willow Halls themselves. You enter in through a remarkably small door in the back of a very well fortified wall that doesn't seem to have any other open windows. And as you enter, you see you are in a very long corridor that stretches off to your left and to your right again. Very remarkably narrow, only enough for each one of you to walk single file. And Roga, trailing behind you, seems to be struggling, this bulbous shell upon their back. You've not really seen Roga navigate society, as you're very unfamiliar with each other, but they seem to be struggling within spaces that are very clearly not designed for someone of their size in both regards. Kind of clumsily knocking into things, turning around to take a look at something that catches their attention, and then slamming into a wall or knocking over a candle holder. But seems to be taking it in their stride, doesn't seem to be upset, just seems to be kind of constantly bewildered. So you continue to walk down the left corridor that you see. It's very well lit as sconces line the walls. You are led around these winding corridors, which there are a couple of doors you notice lead into some kind of larger central room. You catch a couple of glimpses through ajar doors of people who seem to be conversing or conducting some kind of meeting, but they're not really sitting down or anything formal. They're just kind of standing in the middle of this empty room at the Willow Hall Center, talking about this and that. Don't seem to notice you as you move past the doorways. Eventually, you're led up a series of staircases to what you imagine is the spiral staircase of the western tower of this keep. You circle around, and before long, you find yourself up in this tower here on the left-hand side. This circular room, seemingly Lucas Amberon's office that he has set up for himself, that seems to watch over not just Western Residential District, but also the Forlorn Parish. As you notice this, and you take a look outside in that direction, I'm going to need a perception check from chat to see what you notice about the outside from this vantage point. Max. Okay, Max, hit us with a perception check. This is going to be with a big +7. Okay, so 6 + 7 brings us to a total of 13. With that looking out, unsurprisingly, you see more or less what's being described to you at first. As you look over towards the Forlorn Parish, you see the encircling river is about 20 foot wide. So the river itself would be a pretty sizable obstacle for most creatures unless they are aware of how to swim. And you can see on slight elevations in sections what is very clearly the run-down parish surrounding the church. As you take a look out, the spire of the church itself extends up to about the same height as the tower in which you're currently residing. An enormous structure poking up from the ruins that has very clearly been neglected and untended to for the last year. You are seeing collapsed roofs, sections that seem to have suffered from burn damage. The towering spire of the church itself has large holes in the side of the walls that face you, and you can see that there has been significant damage done by some kind of artillery, which is not entirely unsurprising. There was possibly some kind of siege that happened, but some of the buildings very clearly did not collapse of natural means. You notice that the surrounding trees also seem to be suffering from some kind of ill effect, although you're struggling from this distance to tell exactly what it is. You're seeing that they seem a lot more wilted for this time of year, where the trees are otherwise quite vibrant. There is this kind of deathly bland grayness to everything within that area. Before long, you take in your surroundings and you see that the entire room, all of the walls, circular, are coated in bookshelves that kind of bend around, completely surrounding you in texts that line the walls. Towards the far side, opposite the stairs, you can see that there is some kind of work desk, and you can see in stark contrast to the desk that you saw earlier in the barracks, this one has stacks and stacks of paperwork. There are various books and journals scattered across the desk. This space itself does not seem to have been kept neat at all. You're not entirely sure immediately whether or not that is due to Lucas Amberon being apathetic towards his workspace, or whether or not it is simply because he is too busy to do anything about it, or he just has an overwhelming amount of work to do. So he places his hand up, motioning for you to stop and wait about 6 feet away from the desk itself. He then moves over, pulling a key from a keychain out his belt, unlocking a series of locks out of sight on the one side of the desk, clearly opening some kind of cabinet, and then you hear the rattling of metal as he very kind of haphazardly lets loose a series of broken locks. He then motions you forward, and you can very clearly see on the desk, now that you're inspecting it, a series of fairly mundane bar locks that have very clearly been forcibly broken, not picked. And there are some things about the locks themselves which seem unusual to you. Rusted and worn as they are, there's something strange about the way that they seem to have been broken. So I'm going to need an investigation check from you, chat. You are aware that you do have a magical item that will enhance this check. If you choose to use them, however, Lucas Amberon will be aware that you are in possession of magical items. This is one potential consequence of this action. As we're all still kind of new to the whole system, I want to be fairly transparent to begin with and give you guys opportunities. So I'm going to open a poll and ask you if you want to use the goggles or not. So in that case, opting to not use the goggles, lest it raise some suspicion, I'm going to need an investigation check without advantage, essentially. Okay, Go Turk is going to give you all a +2 bonus. Shadow Squared, hit us with the roll. 18 plus 1 bring us to a total of 19, and then plus another 2 brings us to 21 total. As you stare down towards the locks themselves, you're focusing intensely, best you can, on the strange way in which the bars of these locks seem to have been broken. There's a moment at which you wonder, did they use some kind of cutting tool? And then you think to yourself, no, there would be signs of chips of metal. There would be grooves of the tool itself that would have been left behind. However, as you look at it, this strange mist-like smoke starts to weave in and out once more, as you'd seen earlier that day, passing through the loop of the lock, then going inside the keyhole, and then back out the other side, circling around. And then it draws your attention up from the lock, and you watch as this wispy figure, again, you're not sure if it's the same one, appears and points a single finger down at the lock itself. And then you see the arm of this figure kind of recoils ever so slightly, as if something has been released from the end of the finger. And then you could swear you hear the snapping of the lock. You blink and this figure is gone. Nobody else seems to have seen this occurrence happening. As you look down towards the lock, you see the telltale signs of magic being used to sever the binding loop of this lock itself. You learn from this that whoever broke these locks seems to have magical abilities. So Lucas looks to you. Well then, what do you see? Come on, you're looking very strange right now. I'd like to know what you're thinking about. So, what do you tell him? If anything. Okay. So, choosing to tell the truth, you explain to Lucas that the locks show the telltale signs of magic being used. He looks to you, a strange look on his face. At first, you wonder if he's trying to study you. And I'm going to do a dice roll. Okay. However, this very quickly changes to a smirk on his face. Ah, finally. Someone who's good for something around here. I'm afraid I don't have much in the way of leads immediately, but if you would like to wander down towards the eastern districts, towards the ocean, then I'm sure you'll be able to find someone there who's willing to talk to you. It's sort of been a little bit of a dead end. Nothing terribly valuable was stolen. However, anyone who steals, anyone who breaks the law, is a danger to all of us, and so must be dealt with. If you find anything, I trust that you will report back to me directly, and then I'm sure we can work out a reward. Something sizable for a group such as yours, if we can work out some kind of agreement. After all, we must be loyal, shouldn't we? Not just to each other, but to our better instincts. From this, you know that there are not any significant leads at this point, but that does not mean that they do not exist. There have been some break-ins in the Eastern District, and the best course of action, at least as far as Lucas Amberon is willing to disclose to you, is to start investigating and talking to the locals in that district. I'm just going to check with you, chat, because obviously there are other things you can do and other places you can go to. Do you want to continue on to the Eastern District, or would you like to go to a different location? Okay, so opting to continue east, you exit back down the stairway, first winding down the tower and then leading on. You decide to take a slightly different direction, this time heading out towards what you imagine is the front of the Willow Halls, the front entrance. This door a lot more larger, and you can see that there is a portcullis, a large metal grid gate that is looming overhead as you pass through the archway. You proceed outwards. One thing again that you notice is that don't seem to be any guards at the front doors. There are no individuals that seem to be patrolling the halls themselves. There is almost no military presence here whatsoever. You proceed outwards. The trickling of the river and the streams that break off from it becoming a familiar sound. Following the river and the pathway provided, taking in the sights of the willow trees bending over, the rivers themselves, sometimes dipping into them, the birds flying overhead, the sound of insects in the forest calling out to one another, this sort of constant humming of life surrounding you. And you're thinking to yourself, If it wasn't for the knowledge of the undeath over yonder, you'd think this is quite a peaceful, beautiful, and serene place. You start to hear the murmuring of small crowds, and before long you find yourself at a fork. The left road very clearly leading further into what seem to be very basic but well-built stone homes. The left path leading directly in, and the right path leading around to the right side and possibly further up towards the north, while avoiding traveling directly through this area itself. So I'm just going to ask you if you're going to continue left or circle around the right. Going through the center would more obviously draw attention to yourselves. Circling around, however, would give you a lot more time to observe the outer boundaries of this space and possibly get less caught up in the crowds that are probably at its center. Okay, gonna close it. So circling around the outside, instead opting for the route that will draw less attention to yourselves and give you more opportunities to observe and discern the nature of the people living here. You definitely notice as you pass by the central section, adjacent to what you imagine is sort of like the courtyard of this district, people seem to be quite merrily getting on with their business. Only a couple of them who happen to be looking in the direction seem to pay you any mind, and it doesn't seem as though they call out to try and summon others to them and summon attention to you in the process. I'll see what you guys come up with. Okay, so at this point then, you enter into the district and you start flagging down people to see if you can ask them any questions about the thefts that have taken place. I am going to need a persuasion check as you begin to ask people and see if they, one, know anything, or if they do, if they're willing to tell a stranger. Herb, please roll the dice for us. Okay, so it is a -2, but that makes 15, so nice roll. So you begin to flag down strangers, asking them about the occurrences over the last couple of months, these thefts that you're now aware of, trying to glean any kind of insight into whether or not these people are intimately aware of the circumstances surrounding them, or if they might know somebody who might. It takes a while. Of about the first 5 people that you ask, at least 2 of them don't seem particularly interested in talking to you, but they refer you to the next person along all the same. As you travel from door to door, doing your absolute best to convince people that you are here to help, you eventually find yourself at the door of an elderly gentleman, appearing gnomish in origin, who seems to own a bookstore / library called Spry Step Stories. As you enter this dusty bookshop, you almost immediately are greeted with the overwhelming smell of musky, slightly damp paper just rushing out of this building as you open the doors. You can see that there are cobwebs in most of the corners that you see, but this place is absolutely packed to the ceiling with bookcases that line and separate sections of this building itself that seems to be almost entirely dedicated to the storing and display of these books and not in any way practically organized or presented to be inviting. And as you turn the corner, kneeling over, butt facing towards you, is a fairly well-dressed gnomish gentleman. And as he pulls his head up to look towards you, still kind of like kneeling over as he does so, you see he's wearing these enormous glasses atop a very aged and weathered head, hair on either side with a little bit parted over the top, very poorly covering what is a very receding hairline. These glasses themselves enlarging this gnome's eyes to impossible proportions. He looks back to you. Who are you? What do you say? Okay, so choosing to attempt to seduce the gnome, I'm going to need a persuasion check from chat. I'm going to do a face for the VOD. Listen, freedom has consequences, right? Sometimes the consequences are for me and not for you guys. That's just the way it is. Susanna, hit us with the roll. Honestly, I'm most surprised that this is the first time it's actually won. 5 minus 2. Great job, chat. You're doing so well. So with a grand total of 3, you move over to the gnome, attempting to be flirtatious to try and gain some kind of social advantage, but you forget just how fucking bad you are at it. You watch an increasing look of confusion on this gnome's face as, previously having been knelt over on the ground, he slowly starts to back up away from you, and before long he's pressed up against a stack of books, just kind of leaning away. So let's focus on the important information that you've given me. How about we do that first, and then we see where it takes us after that? Does that sound reasonable? That seems reasonable to all of you? The rest of you back there? And he just looks towards your companions, and they're all just kind of like... Your seduction, remarkably unsuccessful. Well, why don't you have a seat, and then we can go over some of the details. He pulls up a couple of stools and chairs. Not particularly comfortable, but for the purposes of this, you all find yourself kind of gathered in a semicircle between 2 bookcases. The air feels very thick and humid in here. You're looking up towards the towering bookcase, and you're starting to get a little bit worried as you notice that there are several books, very big books, that seem like they are a nudge away from falling off the bookcases and onto somebody's head. You are relayed the details. It turns out that Errol Sprystep was the first to be robbed. They broke into his bookstore and they stole a series of books. There was a text on necromancy and there was a text on ritual magic. Initially, he was not going to report it. However, considering the nature of the books themselves, he did not want to come under suspicion if these books ended up somewhere at a crime scene or somewhere the way they shouldn't be, and it would be traced back to him. You obviously are drawing the same conclusions, and you're starting to understand a little bit as to why Errol might have been more forthcoming with the situation, given the current circumstances that the town has found itself in, with this nest of undead not far away. You relay to Errol that it seems as though somebody with magic had entered the premises, and he agrees with you. He makes note of the fact that this is pretty much what he said to Lucas Amberon, but he did not seem to be interested in listening. Errol looks to you after this discussion. He says, "You know, it's unusual to see people like you around here these days. I mean, not you specifically. You look lovely. You're perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with you. But I mean, your group. You are adventurers, clearly. And ordinarily, I would be very excited to make your acquaintance and have a discussion with you. But adventurers don't seem to stick around here for very long. After a while, they just seem to, well, move on. You know, there are a lot of people here who are suspicious of people from the outside. And, well, I do hope that you watch your backs and that you stay safe during your time here. I understand that you're probably trying to dig around to do some work to earn some coin, but I do hope that you will be careful, that you will be mindful, that you are likely to upset somebody in this line of work, especially if you ask a lot of questions. A characteristic that I would otherwise be, well, celebrating in someone. I'm going to need an insight check, chat. Jean! Let's see that roll. Damn, okay, so a total of 22, 17 plus 5. As you look to Errol as he is explaining the situation and he is giving you this warning, there is something about his behavior that tips you off to there being more to the situation. He is very clearly fidgeting. His right leg is kind of tapping on the ground very quickly, anxious or nervous about something. And he constantly seems to be looking around. Occasionally he turns to look out the window, although, nobody is there. He's just checking to see who's outside. There are also moments in which he seems to pause and ponder, as if being very careful or particular about the words that he uses and the way that he describes things. There is very clearly something up with the situation, something unusual. If not directly related to the thefts themselves, then maybe on a larger scale. Okay, so Errol then suggests that the next place that you should possibly visit is either the Hunter's Lodge or the Cobble Gauge Farm. To his knowledge, there were some other strange occurrences that happened around the same time as the thefts took place. And either the Cobble Gauge family or Hunter, a very literal owner of the Hunter's Lodge, may have more information for you. Okay. Closing the vote. Choosing to go with the lodge. You're aware that this establishment seems to be owned by a single person, completely unironically called Hunter. You have no indication as to this person's demeanor. It doesn't seem as though this matter is being actively investigated, or possibly ever has been significantly investigated by the local forces, which seem to, at very best, be very thinly strung along the pathways of the town. It's entirely possible that there is simply no law enforcement, as you have not seen any organized forces along your travels so far. However, you're here to make some money. Not entirely sure of how long you will stay. You have learned a fair amount about Willowdale already, and this both excites you, the prospect of adventuring once again, this time with a little bit more help than you're used to, but also worries you, as you're perfectly aware of these unusual circumstances that Willowdale finds itself in, with this nest of undead not far from reach. Anything could go wrong at any moment.